Project Binky in colour. Starring Nick Blackhurst. Also starring Richard Brunning. And Rex Hamilton as Abraham Lincoln.
Tonight's episode, a cooling conundrum. Coming up in episode 7, Nick throws himself a birthday party. I lose the power of speech. And it rains a lot. Since you were last with us, we've cleaned back all the welds on the seat base and the floor, finished off the inner arches and generally had a good tidy up of the seams and the welds from underneath. Now she's on her side. Since most of the fabrication had been done above the floor, this area of the car needed a lot of cutting off, folding over, grinding back welds, linishing off and priming. Now, I know it's only 10 feet long, but even so, this process took a hell of a long time. It was also tedious and boring, so we're only showing you the finished product. More interesting things are to follow.
Before we go any further, I feel the need to respond to a few comments we've had about Richard's wife appearing in the workshop in the last episode. Now granted, she's not been this side of the camera before, but the idea that we drag her on screen just to inject a bit of glamour and improve our ratings is not only wrong, it's a little bit unfair and probably a bit sexist too. Sarah's been with us since the beginning of this project, keeping an eye on things, making sure we don't miss anything out and, more importantly, making sure we don't bore you to death. So, not just a pretty face here for your amusement, but more a valued member of the production team. She also does an excellent job in the head department.
Cool, yeah, not half. You want to see the way she handles a die grinder.
Right, chassis rails. All we need to do is run a rail under the floor to join up the two bits we've already got at the front and the back. As usual, it's not quite that easy because the two rails don't line up, so a simple straight rail won't do the job. At the front, we need to get round the anti-roll bar. And at the back, this subframe brace is in the way, so we'll have to run across the top of it inside the car and then drop down through the floor.
Right, we're going to start off at the back. First, we've got to mark out on the floor where the chassis rail is going to fit. You might have noticed that we've incorporated a proper jacking point. This could be the first Mini in history to have these. Then we'll grind 2 slots into the floor so we can extend the chassis rails down from inside the cabin. A quick coat of weld-through primer protects the bare metal until the shell goes for paint. The chassis rail can now get welded to the floor. We've lost count of the plug welds needed to build this thing. Actually, we never really started counting because that way only madness lies. Here's the bits that'll make up the drop-down panels. You can see the bottom of them sticking through the floor now, either side of the bead. And this is what it looks like from the top. To finish that nicely, we've boxed the whole thing in and primed it. At the front, we've got to snake it round the back end of the anti-roll bar. So with the aid of some 2mm plate, that's exactly what we've done. So the front and rear chassis rails are now joined together under the car. There's also 2 proper jacking points installed.
Whilst I've got the shell in this position, I'm going to finish off this rear wheel arch area by making up some closing panels for here and here. You'll never guess what's coming next. I'm betting you guessed wrong. Tell you what, just for old time's sake, how about this instead?
That's right, a good old-fashioned CAD template. And a proper steel piece, and then weld it to the car. Let's close in that tube and tie in the end of the sill. Sorted. We'll do the same again to close in the end of the rear valance. So that's template, steel piece, hit it with hammers, and weld it in. Lovely. We'll finish off the little box section below the chassis leg when we've worked out where the exhaust and towing eye are going. Nick's going to have a real problem accessing the other side of the car as the jig only turns one way. Oh no, wait, it doesn't. It swings both ways. Much like its creator, I've heard.
So now that the shell is structurally sound, more or less, it's now time to move on to one of life's biggest questions. And that is, where are we going to put the radiator? Now a lot of you think we haven't got a lot of room. You're absolutely right, but I can tell you now, it's a whole hell of a lot worse than that.
The enormous lack of room at the front isn't the only problem.
And to show you what one of these problems is, it's over to my colleague for a quick demonstration.
A The circumference of the 17-inch wheels that were on the Celica is 190 centimetres. And the circumference of the 13-inch wheels that are going on the Mini is 155 centimetres. So a quick bit of basic maths means that with a top gear ratio of 0.731 and a final drive ratio of 3.933 and a tyre diameter of 23.78 inches for the 17-inch rim, means that at 70 miles an hour, the Celica was pulling 2,844 revs per minute. Wake up, Blackest! This is for your benefit too, you know! So doing the same for the 13-inch rims means that the Mini will be pulling 3,487 revs a minute at 70 miles an hour. That's a 22.6% increase. That's almost 28%.
Or to put it another, some might say simpler way, putting smaller wheels on the running gear means that for any given road speed we're going to be doing a lot more revs. More revs means more heat, and we're then going to be putting that extra heat into a much smaller space. So even if we had room for the standard GT4 radiator, which we don't, it might not even do the job for us. The next problem is the intercooler. It's too small and not really up to the task even in its standard location. If we put it in here, I think it's going to do more charge warming than charge cooling. It's a problem not helped by the fact that it's located here right above the top of the engine. Now this would actually help us out from a packaging point of view because we've got plenty of height to play with. Problem is, even if we were to use it despite its shortcomings, to run it at all, we'd have to use some sort of Impreza style bonnet scoop.
Right, so an Impreza bonnet scoop it is then. Let's see what it'll look like. That, and I think you'll all agree, is totes amazeballs.
Actually, you know, done right, it could be kind of cool. And it would at least be functional. It doesn't really fit in with the look I'm after, so no.
So a standard bonnet it'll have to stay. Hashtag sad face.
Having an unmolested bonnet means we'd need to run a front-mounted intercooler, which we don't have room for either. On top of that, I'd really like to run air conditioning. That might have to stay on the wish list, we'll see how we get on. So, now you know the problems, all we need to do is dream up some creative solutions. That means a lot of thought, and you know what that means around here. Only kidding. Looking at the situation head on, we're pretty much screwed. So I think it's time we had a look at it from a slightly jauntier angle. There's actually plenty of room for a radiator. It's just at the moment, most of it's been taken up with this sodding great big turbo. Now don't panic, we're going to stick with the turbo. There's a couple of things you need to know about this particular one. Firstly, turbo technology has moved on a fair bit in the last 25 years since this one was designed, and we can actually get the same power, if not a little bit more, with a much smaller turbo. Secondly, it doesn't actually need to be here. And that got us thinking, how much space would we have if we got rid of everything off the engine that didn't absolutely have to be how it is or where it is?
Right, so we've bought a scrap engine and box and stripped it down to leave only the things on it that can't be moved or modified. So the water pump and the inlet manifold are about the only things that have to stay where they are. We should be able to engineer our way around the other ancillaries.
40 quid well spent, I reckon. We'll worry about the engine bolt-ons at a later date. All we're interested in at the minute is the cooling system. If we can't cool it, all we're building is the world's most elaborate soapbox racer. So we've made ourselves a bit of space to work with, and we're going to cheat a little bit more by cutting into this front panel. We also now have a plan. After hours of careful debate, we decided to call it Plan A. Meet me at the bench, I'll tell you all about it. Now we could go for a very elaborate, very expensive custom radiator solution, but I want to avoid that, not so much for the reasons of cost, but if you break it, it takes weeks to get a replacement, and I don't want that. So Plan A calls for the use of one of these. It's a radiator off the later shape 205 Celica GT4. We're using this for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's aluminium and it's more efficient than the one we've got. Secondly, it's slightly narrower, and you'll see how that helps us in a second. The issue with using the Celica radiator is it leaves no room in the front for a decent sized air-to-air intercooler. So we're not going to use one. Instead, we're going to go with a water-to-air charge cooler, which needs another radiator in the front panel. And for that job, I've got this out of a 16-valve Corsa B. Why a Corsa radiator? Well, it's slightly wider than the Celica had, and the tanks are on the end, and that means they package together really nicely.
The ST205 radiator has the tanks on the top and the bottom, and the Corsa Rad has them on each side, so plumbing them shouldn't be too difficult, and together it's a fairly compact solution.
So all I've got to do now then is try and fit them. Simple.
The whole of the front end of the Mini, including the radiators, is going to be removable. To do that, we need to make up the frame that the front end hangs off, and to do that, we need to hack off the chassis legs. Oi mate, looks like you've missed a bit. These are the brackets that will hold the entire front end to the car. After bolting the brackets together, they get tacked onto the chassis legs either side of the cut. Then unbolt them ready to lop off the end of the box section. Power tools, air tools, hand tools, whatever gets the job done really. So there we have it. The front portions of the main chassis legs are now removable, but still precisely the same length as they were before. As Paul Daniels once said, that's magic. But it doesn't stop there. No, it doesn't. We're drilling some holes in the ends, so this removable chassis leg will become somewhat of a deformable crash structure. Now, it's not exactly Euro NCAP rated, but as they say, every little helps. A quick linish back and a blow over with some primer and it's ready to go back on. You can see that the notches we cut out will act as a weak point in a low-speed crash, and hopefully mean the rest of the front of the chassis setup is unaffected. I'm not entirely sure, however, that we'll ever get a low-speed impact in this thing. The radiators are going to be mounted to a lower crossbeam, and this crossbeam is going to be detachable from the main chassis legs. Therefore, we need some drop plates from the chassis legs to bolt the crossbeam to. Once the steel is drilled, bent up and generally fettled into shape, you're left with this magnificent creation ready for the captive nuts to be welded in. And there it is, ready to be fixed to the car. We've clamped the drop plates to the end of the chassis legs and to a frame that runs under the jig to make sure they're completely level and true before welding them to the car. So that's the drop plates finished. Now to add the crossbeam. Here's one we made earlier. Now we'll just bolt that into place and see how she looks. The captive nuts will make disassembly, should we need to, much easier and much faster. There we go. Now we have somewhere to mount the dual radiator setup. And as you can see, it's barely visible below the bottom of the front valance.
It's been a lot of work turning the end of these chassis rails into bolt-on crumple zones, but the truth of the matter is, any half-decent shunt in this thing is probably going to result in the cam belt ripping the hair off me nuts, regardless of what we do at the front here. I have come to terms with the situation, and it does at least mean if it happens, I won't have to wax as much next time I want to wear a mankini. Provided, of course, if it does happen, I've got enough limbs left to get away with wearing a mankini. Anyway, if it's not about safety, and it's not about crash repair, why go to all the effort of making it bolt-on? It's all about future-proofing again. Plan A is a good plan. The truth is, we're not going to know if it works until the car's finished and on the road. Then it's too late, and I don't want to go cutting into chassis. Doing it this way means if we have got to change the radiator setup, it's simply a case of unbolt it, modify or make new, bolt it back on without actually touching the car. Talking of radiators, we'll probably see if we can get the ones we've got to fit before we worry about changing them.
Okay then, mounting the radiators. Both rads have lugs on the bottom which need rubber mounting grommets to slide into. Obviously both are different sizes, so we'll need different brackets for them. And we won't be using these actual radiators, these are just patterns for us to use while fabricating the mounts. Just got to get all that lot in the car. Pretty much since the Mini was launched, race and rally competitors have been stepping the grille off in order to mount an oil cooler underneath. We've not actually read the book, but I'm pretty sure it's one of the oldest tricks in there. The first of the radiators to go in is the one for the charge cooler, the Corsa Rad. And the second is the engine coolant radiator from the Celica ST205, mounted directly behind. At this stage, the rad mounting brackets are only being tacked into place on the crossbeam. We may need to make some adjustments later on. And there we have it. The two radiators are now actually attached to the Mini for the very first time. Now without all the ancillaries in the way, there's loads of room for the coolers. There'll be a lot of thinking time needed in order to get them all back in again, but for now, this is a nice step forward. The header tank on the main radiator is, of course, higher than the highest waterway in the head.
The next job should be to make up a frame to support the tops of these two radiators. It's that tight in there, there's no point doing it until I've fitted the new front panel and new wings. I can't do that until I've sorted out the doors.
I wish somebody would sort out the doors. Jim Morrison bored me to tears. Anyway, that's another story. On to the mini doors.
On most mini projects, sorting the doors is simply a case of repair or replace, but you may have noticed the customer on this gig is a bit of an arse who thinks he can have everything. And in this instance, everything includes electric windows, central locking, a complete change of the interior door furniture, and some side impact protection. And there's no sense skinning and fixing the bottom of the door, only to ruin it later, so we'll tackle the mods first. Why do I do this to myself?
First mod on the table is going to be to get rid of the manual window winder mechanism.
No, it isn't. The first job is to get rid of this door hinge because it's pissing me off.
All right, keep your hair on, mate. It's seized on, we get it. You get it off, and I'll get the funk out. That's right, Nick's so good he can actually weld things apart. Right, now he's got that out of his system, we can crack on with the electric window modification.
You can buy an electric window kit for a Mini. I don't like them for a number of reasons, and we can't use one anyway because we want to run a side impact protection bar. So instead, we're going to use one of these. Now, I don't know how either yet, but I think these doors have just become a project in their own right.
No kidding, this is going to drive us round the twist. How do we go about fitting that mechanism in a door that's already too narrow, along with a side impact bar? After literally hours of head scratching, thinking and tea drinking, we've come up with these bits of plate. We start by marking up all the steel plates, then cut them all to size. Drill some not so random holes, fold up the plates on the bender, roll a bead into the runner guide, and have a cup of tea. Joggle a strengthening step into the edges, punch some plug weld holes through. Now we can start putting it together. Weld the runner guide to the main plate, spot the motor mount on too. And that's what it looks like, ready to mount to the door. Cut out the inner door skin, offer it up before welding it on for good. Simple really, it only took 50 odd seconds.
Now I just need to make the window glass fit the reg.
Start by removing the original runners from the manual regulator and replace them with these fellas, what we made. Gently tap them into place using a glass hammer and add the fixing screw. Carefully wrestle the window glass into the door frame and locate the runners into the regulator. Slide the runner into position and gently do up the bolt. The result of all that work is this.
So we've managed to get some electric windows, which was tricky enough, but the next job is changing the door fittings, and this has all the hallmarks of being a complete mindfuck.
Yes, it's a nightmare. Anyway, we can get rid of the window winder already, and we'll now junk the rest of the door furniture for good measure. We're going to replace them with a door handle from a Mitsubishi L200, and a central locking solenoid from an MG-ZR.
Nick's off having a nervous breakdown, and I'm going to explain why. On the Mini door catch, you need 10mm of travel to lock and unlock it. On the Mitsubishi door handle he's chosen, you need 15mm of travel to unlock and lock it. And on the central locking solenoid, you need 30mm of travel to lock and unlock it. But not only that, to open the mini door, you need to push the latch, and on every single other car in the world, you pull it. So all we've really got to do is solve all the different stroke lengths for all the different lock mechanisms, along with reversing the direction of the door opening lever. Oh, and we've got to fit it all inside a mini door, which isn't really big enough. So now you can see why Nick's having a nervous breakdown, and I've had a recurrence of my drinking problem.
This is the result of Darwin's law of engineering natural selection. And these are the evolutionary steps leading to that apex creation. To mount the new pivot plate, we've got to cut yet more out of the Mini's door. And there it is, tacked into place. You'll see what those 4 captive bolts are for in a moment. We'll quickly whip up a bracket to mount the solenoid, and then weld it to the door. That's about the only place left on the door we could have put the solenoid. The final thing for me to do is to make the pivots themselves. These are the key to the whole endeavour. So here it is, the result of weeks of work. Electric windows and a central locking system so slim it fits inside a mini door, sits behind the door card and doesn't interfere with the window reg. Let's see that again, but this time in slow motion. I think we'll leave it there for this episode and retire to our padded cells for a lie down. Be sure to tune in next time for another exciting episode from the files of Project Binky.
Window goes up. Window goes down. Window goes up. Window goes down. Window goes up. Window goes down. Window goes up. Window goes down.